Hey class, Dr. Masters again, and today I want to talk about kind of the other side of narrative time. And if you remember, narrative time comes in sort of four different, what we can call temporal registers. These four ways of measuring and knowing time within our novels. And to remember, the first one is, when was it written? When was it produced? And why is that important? The second one is, when is it set? And sometimes it's set at the same time. We gave the example of The Great Gatsby, which was written in the late 20s, set during the Roaring 20s, and the setting is the exact same. It's contemporaneous with the novel itself. And in Parable of the Sower, we know it's set 30 years in the future. The novel was written in 2023, and its time is actually, interestingly, it's our own time, 2024 to 2027. Or is it 2025? You'll have to check me on that. I think it's 2024. And then we have the present tense of the novel. When does the action begin? When does it end? And because Lauren's novel is written as a journal, it is sort of relentlessly in the present tense. And then we have narrative structure, plot structure. What is the order in which events take place? And there are some flashbacks. She remembers things from her childhood. She talks about, Bankole, and she talk about the past and what the world used to be like. And he tells some stories about, how he came to get his name back in the 60s. Sorry, there's a little noise here. It'll be a bonus question where I'm talking from here. Actually, I'll just make it one of the regular questions. It'll be question number 10. Where am I today? Where's Waldo? Where's Dr. Masters? And I'll save that till the end of the video. So the other side I want to talk about is what we call narrative place and narrative space. Narrative place and narrative space. And while a text we can locate in its time, we also need to locate it in its actual place. Where does the action take place? And what spaces does the text primarily occupy? And for this one, as I've come to understand it, and again, these aren't anything that you could look up in a textbook. This is the way I've come to understand how narrative and how novels work, is you have three primary forms of space and place. And the first one is the actual setting. Where are we in the world? And in Parable of the Sower, we know that we are in the beginning, we are in a suburb just outside of Los Angeles, and we are in California, and we could think about, what does California mean? What does it typically represent? Well, it's seen as the promised land, right? It is Hollywood. It is the place everyone wants to get to. It is the end of the frontier. And you could think about that in terms of Lauren's world. It's kind of a hellscape instead of the promised land. And so that place is very important. Part two is kind of narrative space. What kind of spaces do we primarily occupy? And you can think about this in terms of a narrative's kind of architecture. What kind of buildings do we occupy? We have the walled city, for example, as the first space we occupy. What are some characteristics of that space? Are we primarily inside Lauren's house, or are we primarily out in the neighborhood? And you'll notice that most of the action takes place in the neighborhood, although we see Lauren's bedroom and we see the kitchen where a lot of action takes place. We don't see like the living room For example, we don't go into Keith's room. Um, we don't go into the parents' room except after the big conflagration, the world of the walled city ends, and she goes back inside her own house and scavenges. So, and then our next major space in the novel is that of the road itself, the road to the north. And how does that space differ from the walled city? What kind of freedoms does it offer? What kind of dangers does it offer? We go to state parks. We go to the ocean, for example. So these are all spaces that the narrative occupies, that takes us through. And the final register is, what are these places and spaces, what do they feel like? These are more experiential for the reader and for the characters. What emotions do these places evoke in the characters? How do they feel about them? Think about the difference between Lauren and her friend Joanne. Joanne seeks just the safety of that wall, and Lauren is longing, like Keith, to know what the world is outside of those walls. Keith because he wants to prove he's a man, Lauren because she sees it as inevitable that the walled city is no longer going to always be there. How does then the group experience the world outside of the walls? What kind of dangers does it offer them? What kind of fears does it evoke in them? And when do they feel safe? When do they feel comfort in that outside world? Like at the state park that they go to. We finally get to Bancole's land, which is, again, that's another space that we occupy under part 2. But under part 3, how do they feel about that place? So part 3 is mainly about how do we experience the places that we occupy with the characters, that the narrative tells us stories about. Okay, so there is 1, 2, and 3. 1 is, where are we in the world? What is our primary place in the world? Part 2 is what kind of spaces does the novel emphasize? In The Road, for example, it's the road itself, and we'll talk more about the road in relation to these temporal registers and spatial registers, time and space. And then with both, what kind of, how does time work? What does time evoke in us? These where we are and when we are, and when the narrative's written, how its plot structure creates a different sense of time, and then how in space do we orient ourselves. Okay, so for your 10th question is going to be, where in the world am I? And I'm on the Noonan campus today, coming to you from one of the outside tables, but the answer is Dr. Masters is on the University of West Georgia's Noonan campus, where I teach 2 of my classes. Okay, that's all I wanted to get to today. Hope you learned a little something, enjoyed the video. I've got a little bit of cold, so I'm a little froggy today. But I'm not the world's greatest video performer, but I hope at least I'm giving you some good information that will be part of your exam and that you find helpful and interesting. Okay, until the next video, which is going to be on narrative perspective, which is kind of the third major category that I want to talk about in terms of how we talk about novels and how we talk about narratives. All right, take care.